My novel Grace and Marigold is set in London around 1974, and it's told from the perspective of 20-year-old Grace, who arrives in London determined to shrug off her Australian past and reinvent herself. After a rocky start, she ends up in a communal squat and gets a job at a rackety publishing company. But she's hiding from herself, haunted by the unbearable thought that she might be a lesbian, a dyke, a fate she considers almost worse than death. And then, despite herself, she falls secretly in love with one of the women in the squat, the enigmatic Marigold. It's a novel about sexuality and the sexual mores of the era, and also about female friendship based on secrets and subterfuge. And because Grace is only 20, it's about growing up, working out who you are. And at the same time, it's an exploration of alternative life in London in the 70s, squatting, political protests, encounter groups and shonky gurus, and the spectre of the IRA bombing campaign that haunted London during those years. I think it's both witty and moving, and I hope readers will be fascinated by the world of the novel and find Grace's journey compelling. So readers always ask, where does the story come from? I lived in London for about 6 years in the 1970s, and I was 20, the same age as Grace when I arrived. So, of course, there are lots of details that come from my memories of that time, even though the story is fictional. And I wanted to write about that period because it was seminal for me. The whole thing of being in your early 20s, coming to grips with who you are, who you want to be, and the search for meaning. Things that don't really change from one generation to the next. Of course, the details are different. And alternative 70s London was a really fascinating, liberating place in all kinds of ways, with so many resonances for now. For example, homelessness, squatting, radical politics. That's just a few of the examples. So Grace finds a room in a communal squat, and the world of squatting is a big part of the novel. At the time, it meant that a whole lot of young people who didn't have any money could live in London. And it was a really do-it-yourself existence, fixing broken down houses, living communally, scrounging for everything, and learning to do all kinds of things, for example, illegally connecting the electricity and plumbing in things in the bathroom, things that we probably shouldn't have done. And then there's the world of work that Grace enters, a publishing company that isn't what she expects. And it confronts her with different problems, and I'll say more about that in a moment. So Grace's struggle with her sexuality is a central thread in the book, and I drew on some of my own experiences for this. The whole issue of internal homophobia is something that I suffered from, and I really wanted to explore it. Grace has absorbed all the prejudice and negativity of that time, and she ravages herself with those attitudes. In fact, in her new life, she's not really facing terrible discrimination or abuse. It's all happening inside her head, and that's what she has to deal with. I have to admit, there's definitely something of me in the character of Grace. But also, she's not me. Even if you start with a real person, the character does tend to take over, and they have their own views and characteristics. There are similarities, her insecurities and doubts for one thing, and, as I've said, her internal homophobia. But the story, the plot, is fictional, and Grace is acting and reacting to that. So would I have responded the same way? I think that's impossible to tell. Although I have no doubt that there are people who know me who may see some similarities, maybe things I can't actually see. I want to say something about Marigold too, because she's a crucial character. And my impulse was to create someone who'd challenge Grace and be from a different world. Marigold's English, upper class, and very enigmatic, and also heterosexual. She remains essentially unknowable to Grace, who falls for her in a big way. And ultimately, it's really through this relationship that Grace is forced to face up to things. I did use a real person as a jumping off point for Marigold. Her name was Rose Dugdale, and as it happens, she died quite recently. She was a radical activist from an upper-class background who got involved in the IRA in the 70s and spent time in prison for her actions. I didn't research Dugdale as such. I just wanted a touchstone and then invented Marigold from that. The squat Grace moves into is the Free Republic of Beltonia, which I based on a street of squats in West London. The squatters there got together to stop a threatened eviction by seceding from the UK, which they did symbolically, by forming the Free and Independent Republic of Frestonia. There were all kinds of interesting people in Frestonia, actors, musicians, writers, and also a group of my friends that included Tony Street, a photographer who published a book of his photographs of Frestonia a couple of years ago. There are 7 other people in Grace's squat, and they're all characters we get to meet and who play various roles in her life. Gerald, the de facto leader of the squat, is important because Grace thinks he might be the one to save her from a life in the shadows. That's what she thinks awaits her if she's a lesbian. He's working class and involved in the politics of squatters' rights. Grace gets a job as a Girl Friday at a place called Primo Press, and this takes her out of the Free Republic of Beltonia into another world. The first shock is discovering that they haven't actually published any books. Grace is pretty clueless in the job, despite the fact that she's smart. Part of her problem, something I can identify with, is not wanting to appear stupid and therefore not asking for help. She's also intimidated by her immediate boss, Rita, who, for reasons that eventually become clear, has it in for her. The big boss, Simon, is a womaniser. But despite this, Grace allows herself to become somewhat entangled with him. And although Simon abuses his position, I think the scenes between him and Grace are the funniest in the novel, until, of course, they're not. The workplace dynamics and the sexual politics are still relevant. It's all about being young and female in a patriarchal world. I've been a screenwriter for quite a few years, and people often ask me about the differences of writing for film versus writing a novel. Writing a novel, you're in control, or you're more in control, and there's a real freedom in that, which you don't have to the same degree when you're writing a script. Scripts are much more of a collaboration. You know, you have a script editor, a director, producers, financiers, and they all have some kind of input. Film and TV cost a lot more to make, and so that changes the art versus commerce dynamic quite a lot. I mean, of course, the publisher wants to sell books and make money too, but the scale is different. There are really a lot of other differences I've found between writing scripts and novels, too many to go into, but I guess for me the actual process is very different. I start a novel with characters and have pretty much no idea what it's about or what the plot will be in advance. I guess I write to find out. Writing scripts, you do a lot of working out of the story and plot early on, mostly so that you can attract development finance and get paid to write, which is definitely a positive. And it works for scripts, but my attempts at plotting the novel in advance haven't been successful. I seem to need to write into the darkness, grope around for the way forward, search for both plot and meaning. I have to say it's not really an efficient method. There are always false leads and wrong turns, but it's really the only way that's worked for me so far. I think if you're writing in a genre, if you're writing, say, crime or romance, you probably do need to work out the plot first. So screenwriting's really influenced me, and it's pretty hard to say what kind of novelist I would have been without that experience. It's made me very aware of cause and effect, things like significance and consequence. And I think it's helped me focus on characters, making them multidimensional and memorable, allowing them to be contradictory but still believable, not wholly good or bad. Look, I think they're all things you learn anyway as a writer, but they're definitely things that screenwriting's taught me. Screenwriting's also helped me to be more open to hearing feedback at various draft stages. The collaborative aspect when you're a screenwriter can be really frustrating, but it's also liberating and incredibly helpful. So getting feedback on drafts of the novel is something I always look forward to. Good critical feedback is crucial, and it always helps to make the work better.